a safer, more consistent, higher quality ride experience for drivers and passengers alike. There was a subset of drivers that were looking for a better experience and a subset of riders that were looking for a better experience, and that we could create something that was really differentiated from what was just available broadly in the market. To exert that control, we knew we needed to employ drivers. They needed it. And so we needed to own the vehicles. It's the real estate footprint, the charging infrastructure, the capability to store, clean, charge, and maintain thousands of vehicles.
Will Coleman is the co-founder and CEO of Alto, an affordable premium rideshare and delivery service headquartered in Dallas, Texas, and now operating in multiple cities, including Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, and Washington. Alto stands out for its focus on safety, hospitality, and consistency. And before founding Alto, Will was a partner at McKinsey & Company, where he led the consumer air and travel practice and advised major global travel brands on disruptive growth strategies. Will, how are you doing today?
Hey, Harry, doing well.
All right. So we had an alternate bio for you too that I think you wrote with Grok. Do you want me to read that as a secondary one too, just in
I mean,
case?
it's a lot more entertaining.
Yeah, Will Coleman is an adventurous spirit with a knack for celebrating life's vibrant moments, from festive Lunar New Year's celebrations in Las Vegas to crafting meaningful personal expressions through tattoo art. With a keen eye for detail, he has explored creative enhancements for digital platforms like optimizing websites to connect with audiences effectively. Always embracing new experiences, Will balances bold creativity with a thoughtful approach to his endeavors. Not bad.
Pretty good.
I think it's like less professional, but maybe more akin to your personal spirit,
I,
right? So,
I don't know where a lot of that came from, but I mean, it definitely sounds more fun.
well, hey, I'm excited to have you back on the Rideshare Guy podcast for the fourth time. I think we're also going to be posting this to our Driverless Digest podcast also to get a
Awesome.
little interesting action there because I really think this fleet component that you guys are now operating is interesting. But this is your fourth time being a guest on my podcast, and you know who you just surpassed?
No telling.
All right. Well, I think you're now leading, and you just surpassed Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi.
Dara,
So
okay. He's been
I
on
don't
three
know.
times.
Well, the first time, actually, now that I think about it, I interviewed him on stage in person at a driver event in LA, and they wouldn't let me record, probably because they like wanted to make sure I didn't go off the rails. I think I must have done a good job that time. But then they let me do two recording sessions with him after that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I've been CEO just slightly longer than he has, so I think we're at least keeping pace. This is
All right.
year number 7 for me.
Nice. Well, that's definitely a good foreshadowing about some of what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, can you give us a quick refresher on Alto and, then maybe talk a little bit about what's new since the last time we had you on the Rideshare Guy podcast back in 2022?
Yeah. Wow. It's been 3 years. So a lot's going on. Alto, as you mentioned, is kind of a vertically integrated rideshare platform.
Hmm.
And we started Alto back in 2018 with really two objectives in mind. The first was to create a safer, more consistent, higher quality ride experience for drivers and passengers alike. We felt that as the big platforms got bigger and bigger, really more ubiquitous, you might say,
Hmm.
they also became less consistent in their quality, and that there was a subset of drivers that were looking for a better experience and a subset of riders that were looking for a better experience, and that we could create something that was really differentiated from what was just available broadly in the market. In order to generate that differentiation, we had to really change the business model. We felt we needed to exert a level of control that the
Hmm.
other platforms weren't. And so we wanted to exert that control, we knew we needed to employ drivers. They needed to be our W-2 employees that we could vet and train, performance manage, and that we wanted to provide them with the tools to provide this differentiated experience. And so we needed to own the vehicles to be able to keep them safe and well maintained, and so we combine this kind of vehicle ownership and fleet management platform with a W-2 employee model. That creates a really differentiated experience, again, for drivers and
Hmm.
passengers out on the road. But it also builds the foundation for what we believe is the future of electric and ultimately autonomous mobility. It's the real estate footprint, the charging
Hmm.
infrastructure, the capability to store, clean, charge, and maintain thousands of vehicles and fleets in cities across the country. And so increasingly, our business is becoming much more focused on that latter part. As we've built out these capabilities, we're now showcasing that kind of fleet management capability, and we're actually working with others in the space, including Uber, to provide them with high quality, safe, consistent fleet and drivers to operate on their platform as well.
Nice. So before we talk about that Uber partnership, one thing that I feel like since I've, been covering a lot on the AV side over the past 6 months, I've been really trying to hammer home. Basically, everyone who comes to me with a shared fleet just talks about how tough it is. Like, oh, you have these vehicles, whether you own them or not, or I have to hire drivers, right? And I feel like me telling people how hard it is isn't getting the message across. So I don't know. First of all, do you agree with me? And second of all, maybe if there's an example that you can highlight of like what makes this business thing, challenging or not so challenging.
I completely agree. I think people really underestimate and overlook the complexity of fleet management in
Hmm.
this space, and in particular as we move closer to autonomy. There's been a lot of big companies that have done large fleets for a long time,
Yeah.
and rental car companies, even car dealerships, others that operate bus fleets or other things,
Hmm.
service fleets. I think maybe the easiest way to describe why this, I believe, is so much more complex and challenging is because in most of those fleets, you put the car on the road for X number of hours a day or a week. In most cases, it's multiple days at a time. You're a rental car fleet. You actually don't want the cars in your lot, right? Like you're
Yeah.
measured by how infrequently they are stored with you and how
Hmm.
frequently they're out on rent. Even if you're a service fleet, a lot of those fleets, they come in, but then they go back home with the driver. And so these fleets operate on kind of days and week cycles. We operate on an hourly or in some cases minute by minute cycle. The level of
Mm.
vehicle and asset utilization that we're trying to achieve, right, means that we want a vehicle to be in our depot multiple times a day, but for as little time as possible.
Yeah.
So we get a car in, we're optimizing to get that car onto a charger, cleaned, serviced, and put back on the road in a matter of minutes, not hours or days. And then it's going to come back to us, in just a couple more hours. And so that level of optimization and efficiency, I think, is something that, yeah, just hasn't been really tackled, at least to my experience or knowledge in this space before.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of putting it, that minute by minute utilization, that much higher frequency. I've heard people kind of compare the rideshare industry, you're competing for passengers on a trip by trip basis instead of, like even like an airplane trip, like what you used to cover, right? Like that's a big purchase. It's planned in advance, right? It's not something like, oh, let me open an app and I want to, I'm feeling lazy. So let me, take a ride instead of a walk, right? So, or another transportation option. So I think there's something about that high frequency minute by minute kind of aspect of shared fleets and this industry that makes it so tough.
Exactly. It's very hard to plan, right?
Yeah.
Because it is highly variable. It can change, there's a lot of externalities that can change: weather,
Hmm.
traffic, an accident. And so you're trying to create really high optimization, really high efficiency,
Mm.
really high predictability and reliability, all while trying to manage all these external factors that can kind of change and adjust also by the minute. And so the level of precision, like our fleet management platform, is scheduling these vehicles and predicting when a car is going to return to our depot, when we're going to be
Mm.
able to, how fast it's going to charge, how soon we can put that next driver in it. And we're trying to pair up those two human things,
Yeah.
to somebody arriving and somebody departing with all the other stuff that's happening. And those things all have some level of unknown that
Yeah.
you also have to kind of build in.
Okay. So let's fast forward a bit and talk about, the partnerships today. So you mentioned that you're now working with Uber. So how is Alto partnering with Uber these days?
Yeah, we're really again applying kind of the same concepts in our business that we've always
Hmm.
held, that we used to distribute exclusively on our own platform, the Alto platform, the Alto app. And now we're just, it's the same W-2 employee drivers, the same company-owned fleet, the same
Hmm.
management facilities. But instead of operating on the Alto platform, those drivers are operating on the Uber platform, which is great for us because it really helps us scale. It brings a whole new level of demand. Obviously,
Hmm.
Uber's massive and has, you know, millions and millions of customers in cities across the US. And that scaling is something that's really critical to our business. This is a scale business that you really need to operate large fleets, large facilities. That's another reason it's tough. It's a pretty low margin business, so you
Hmm.
need to do it at scale to really reach those levels of efficiency. And I think it's great for them because they get a lot of the benefits of what our differentiators have been and are, right? The safety aspect, the consistency aspect. Our drivers accept 100% of trips and
Mm.
cancel very few of them. And so the marketplace is more consistent. It's more reliable. The product quality, again, we see these cars multiple times a day. They're cleaned by our professional service agents. The drivers are there just to drive,
Hmm.
and we're able to train them and give them the tools to do that safely and with a high quality. And so we think it's really been a cool partnership because I think it's super beneficial to both sides, and it really helps speak to, I think, our shared vision for how autonomy will come alive.
Yeah.
Utilizing many of the same resources, the same depots that these human-driven fleets are using, we're going to be able to push autonomous vehicles through, which will actually make the depots even more efficient because the
Yeah.
service agents, the people there, will just service more vehicles. And so, we're really excited to set that up and to scale it really quickly, which has been a fun part of this new partnership.
Nice. So where are you guys partnered with Uber?
Today in Miami and Los Angeles, but
Okay.
we're really aiming to grow to many more cities throughout the US and maybe even internationally. I think you'll see us entering more cities late this year and into early next as we look to kind of build this out
Hmm.
across the US.
And so in your other markets, Dallas, Houston, and Washington, you're operating still under the Alto brand. But in Los Angeles, is there still an Alto brand, or can I only get an Alto on Uber now, basically?
In those Uber markets today, you can only get our vehicles on the Uber platform. In our existing markets or our other markets, we still do have the Alto app. And we're always,
Mhm.
thinking about now these kind of two different parts of our business and
Yeah.
and where we're investing and where we're growing. But certainly the Uber partnership is the newest and most exciting part that's growing very, very fast for us.
Yeah. So you mentioned, this demand piece when it comes to Uber, and I think this is something that Dara, their CEO, has mentioned over and over in numerous, investor calls and forums whenever he's talking about partners, right? Autonomous partners specifically. Hey, come to us. We generate a ton of demand. I think they just released their earnings. I think if I did the math right, they're doing 32 million rides a day around the world, which
Yeah,
is pretty insane. I think, like compared to, Waymo, like everyone says, wow, they're growing, they're everywhere. They do 25,000 rides a week in 4 or 5 cities, right? So it's like,
yeah.
obviously Waymo's big and growing and an awesome product, but like relative to Uber, and sort of a bit unfair because Uber's international, but like, man, that's a tiny, I think people forget, like, basically Uber does 30 million plus rides a day, basically. So it sounds like you kind of agree. Is the kind of most valuable piece, of Uber, is it like that massive demand that they have? And like, what does that
Yeah.
mean for a company like you? Is this something you guys have struggled with in the past, where it's just better, higher quality, or, break down that demand a little bit?
I think it's Uber superpower for sure.
Mhm.
I mean, they have aggregated the world's demand,
Yeah.
or the vast, vast majority of it, right? 75 to 80% of it,
Yeah. Well, especially in the
into
US.
into a single place. Yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly in the US, but I mean, even internationally, their
Yeah.
share is quite large. And again, this is a business that absolutely requires scale. I mean, I
Hmm.
mean, they spent dear. I mean, to be clear, right? They spent a lot of money and a lot of
Yeah.
time to get there. But they did so under the same hypothesis, which is that once you get there, it's the marginal impact of having that aggregation and scale is really valuable. And I agree with them.
Mm.
It was the hardest part of our business was
Mm.
growing, to get to the scale necessary, to get to the density in a city necessary to make the core economics of a fleet work. It's incredibly capitally intense. You have to put the cars and the drivers out on the road. You have to,
Hmm.
subsidize that supply liquidity, and then you have to go build the demand behind it. And yeah, I mean, I actually think like Waymo, we did it for a long time. We were quite successful. We had a differentiated product.
Hmm.
Even with that, I think it was really, really tough. And so yeah, I think this is the one of the reasons that we attached our company and our business to this partnership, and the reason that I'm excited about it is because I think it kind of marks at least what I believe, my hypothesis, my thesis is on the future of this business. I think Uber will be the core distribution platform for many forms, but primarily, driven human and autonomous mobility, certainly in the US and I think probably globally. And so it gives us the best opportunity to work with a range of different, autonomous partners, with a
Yeah.
range of different vehicle OEMs, and to really scale at a very exciting pace.
Did you, when you first launched Alto, were you pitching it as like, hey, this is, going to compete with Uber, or hey, this is an area that Uber doesn't do so well? Like, what was your pitch to investors, and like, why were you guys going to stand out? What were you saying? And like, obviously, how has that transitioned to now?
It's funny because, I actually have been saying this to investors. It's not to consumers, to be clear.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, our external messaging to consumers was one of differentiation and that we
Yeah.
needed to build. But to investors,
Well,
I
I
mean,
think
I actually,
it was a very fair differentiation, right? Like we do have trained drivers, we do have the same vehicles, like you know what you're going to get, and like I think I've kind of joked with you before, the what were the original vehicles? Oh, the Buicks. Like they weren't my favorite car in the world, but like, hey, at least I know what I'm going to get every single time, right? And it's like, oh, the room or the experience, it's a comfy ride, right? So I think that was a compelling pitch in that sense to riders, but obviously it's like a different product than even Uber Black, right? Where it's like on demand, lots of drivers. You might get good, you might get bad. Who knows what type of car? Now every time I call an Uber Black in LA, I get a Tesla Model Y, and I'm like, cancel, cancel. I hate that car for Uber Black.
there shouldn't be many of them on the road anymore because they're not eligible. But I mean, yes, look, like I used to actually say to invest. I mean, and I've shared this with
Mhm.
some of the Uber folks because I think it's important to think about like why we founded the company and what we were trying to build. We actually had a page in our very early pitch deck that said, Uber's not a competitor; they're a partner. And
Mhm.
it would have been naive to say we weren't competing with them in some small
Yeah.
scale, to build our business. But the real vision here was that we were building this platform. We thought that what they were building, what we were building were actually very different and
Yeah.
incredibly complementary. That they were gonna need operators,
Mhm.
consolidated operators, not, I obviously they've built like incredible
Yeah.
individual distribution, but as autonomy becomes closer, I think this is becoming less contrarian
Yeah.
and more clear that large fleets are going to be a clearer path than individual vehicle ownership to scaling autonomy. And
Got it.
so, we felt that in order to kind of prove that hypothesis, especially starting back in 2017 when autonomy was, I mean, it was exciting and people were saying we're going
Round
to have it
one.
by
I call that
2020, but
round
from an
one.
investor standpoint, it wasn't really, it
Yeah.
wasn't really close enough. We knew we had to build it, with our own, infrastructure and with our own
Got it.
employees and with our own brand. But yeah, I mean, it was really in service of building out this architecture below the surface that's enabled us to effectuate and
Yeah.
really, I think, create mutual value through this partnership today.
What do you think are some of the main benefits to Uber with this model? I see a couple on kind of more the customer side. You mentioned, kind of a consistent product, a consistent experience, and I see a couple kind of more on the behind the scenes industry. But like, I guess if or when you did pitch Uber, like, what was the number one thing, like number one problem you told them you were going to solve?
Yeah, I think it's really three or four things. I mean, it
Well, you got
starts
to
with
pick one.
safety. Okay, well, so I mean, it starts with safety, and
Okay.
and you talk about on your podcast a lot the cost of commercial insurance in the United
Mm,
States has been a huge problem in the industry, generally.
yeah.
But our model has proven to be significantly
Mm,
safer. And the oversight that we exert over drivers, the technology that we wrap around them,
mm,
we now have over 200 million miles of experience. So enough miles to really, actually from a statistical actuarial perspective,
hmm.
be able to say and prove that those outcomes are different.
Interesting.
And so
Well, because you have
that
employee drivers, they're trained, you have even the vehicles, maybe there's a safety component of that. And then also, I think a big thing too is that like your drivers are paid hourly, right? So there's not an incentive. Like I always tell people, like if I'm an Uber driver and I speed through a yellow light, I literally get to my customer faster and I can now do more trips per hour and make more money per hour. Drivers per hour pay has sort of come down over the past few years. So it's like I'm double incentivized now to like basically drive crazier, drive more unsafely because I want to make more money, right? I wonder if that's got to impact
Yeah,
things
I
too,
think it's a
right?
big. I mean, the reality is that unfortunately, the independent contractor model that works generally in the U.S. rideshare space creates very perverse incentives for safe
Hmm.
behaviors. Right? For you mentioned speed. Our number one complaint with Alto is that our drivers drive too slowly, and I'll take that any day of the week because speed is a critical factor
That's
to
sort of
not
what a
only
lot of people
instant.
complain about Waymo also, right? That it's like they're too
Yeah,
slow, but they're also like kind of saying they're too safe. So it's like you're complaining, but you also aren't complaining, you know?
it's a tough trade-off, and I
Yeah.
mean, we don't want our drivers to drive. There are like thresholds under which you can actually be unsafe by going too slow, and we
Hmm.
don't want to do that. but we would
Yeah.
never send a like memo to all of our employees that say like ignore the speed limit or run a
Hmm.
yellow light if you have to like
Yeah.
that would just never happen. And I do think that that is a critical factor, speed number one. But then also, things, I mean, it's already very distracting to drive as a rideshare driver. It's very different than just driving your own car, right? You're in an
Yeah.
unfamiliar space. You have a passenger in your backseat. You're looking for people, oftentimes at night, busy,
Hmm.
congested areas. And as an independent contractor, you might be juggling multiple apps. A lot of your drivers might have
Yeah.
multiple phones. They've got
Yeah.
a bunch of different
I
things
mean,
going
there's
on,
like
right?
third-party apps on top of Uber and Lyft,
They're
that help you decide
exactly.
which one to take.
And so the cognitive load of all that is
Yeah.
super intense, and then add in it's, people on a phone call or
Yeah.
watching a show or whatever, or listening to a podcast, all the different things
Yeah.
that Uber can't tell them not to do. And
Hmm.
we can. We have a mount. You can't touch the phone. It's on the mount. Like, don't take it
Got
off
it.
the mount. If you touch the phone, if you touch your phone, like we texting, driving, using your phone is less safe than drinking and driving. And so
Yeah.
we have a zero tolerance policy for it. All of these things, again, individually might be kind of small, but add up to something very, very differentiated. And we know for a fact that our safety record, again, it allows us a cost of insurance that's about 3 times lower than Uber's
Hmm.
national average. And so
Well,
that's a massive, massive differentiator.
Well, and yeah, I'm sure, as you know, what's interesting in California, I believe Texas too, the insurance costs are outrageously high. I posted this receipt from my wife's trip. For some reason, it wasn't on my Uber receipt, but it said in December 2024, so pretty recent, in Los Angeles, roughly 43% of customer fares went towards covering government mandated commercial insurance for rideshare, TNC transportation network. And it's like, wow, out of 100, so if you do $100 Uber fare, $43 is going to insurance. And honestly, it sounds really high, but like for everything you just described, that's exactly why it's $43. I think that it's like there's a lot going on there, right? Like they
It's
probably get
huge,
into
and
a lot
and
of
exact
accidents. They
and that's
probably,
exactly the reason, right? That
yeah.
we can differentiate here is
Mm,
because if ours is a third lower or two-thirds lower than that, then I can actually pass. That's it. I can actually do things like pay drivers more,
got
which
it.
I need to do, because I can create a safer environment for them. I can pay them slightly more. I can take away some of this risk for them.
Hmm.
And that's, again, great for Uber and it's great for me and it's great for drivers. So I think
Yeah.
these are
And
like
you guys have the
win-win
200
solutions.
miles of experience or the 200 million miles. So you sort of have the pitch to, that it like all sounds good on paper. And then, as you said, you've got 200 million miles of experience, which I think is pretty unique in this space. I don't think anyone else, has done this employee or, own vehicle model. So you sort of have the actuarial data to, I'm guessing, back it up.
Yeah, and it took us a long time to build that. To be honest, for the first 5 years of our business,
Yeah.
we couldn't get the kind of rates that we have now because everybody just assumed that
Got it.
we'll just have the same performance outcome as Uber or Lyft or the general public. And so you get rated by, kind of the worst common denominator, the
Hmm.
lowest common denominator. But after we've, operated for that long and with that many miles, we actually have this differentiated data set that can really, really support everything I'm saying. Again,
Yeah.
it's not just me pitching, it's
Yeah.
reality. And that is a huge moat, I think, personally around our business at Alto, but again, is a very, very advantageous and beneficial opportunity for Uber as well. So that's definitely number one, no questions asked. There's others, but that's the biggest.
Well, I think we might be on the same page on the others because I feel like, one of the complaints we've seen about the Uber product over the years is the consistency, right? Like you don't know what car you're going to get, right? You can always get a car, but it may not be at the price. It may not be the driver, it may not be the vehicle that you want. And we don't need to open the entire can of worms. But I guess talk to me a little bit about, I guess like your 2, 3, and 4 items. I'm guessing it's around consistency and that reliability, right? I mean, even Uber, a few years ago, they started showing drivers, when and where, where the trip is going. And now drivers sit there, analyzing like we kind of coach them to like, hey, where are you going? What's your per mile pay? Like, are you going to get a trip? Right. So, when customers call for a ride now in Uber and Lyft, sometimes it bounces around to a bunch of different drivers because they may not want it. So yeah, talk to me about some of those other secondary
I
problems.
think that's you nailed it. That's number two, right? I mean, and you talked
Hmm.
a little bit about Waymo. I think we see in the industry, and I think a lot of people are selecting Waymo not because it's driven autonomously, but because of the just consistency. You know
Yeah.
exactly what you're going to get when you press that button, and I think that's something again in Alto's kind of DNA.
Hmm.
And so I think again from a marketplace stability, we kind of operate. Think of our fleet as like a hedge fund fleet. We have a
Hmm.
large fleet, hundreds and hundreds of vehicles, and we just kind of accept the market. play the market. And we're not a day trader. We're not, and again, like a lot
Yeah.
of day traders, there's some of your drivers that are experts that have been doing this for a long time that can
Yeah.
gamify it and really, really, that can maximize. But there's others that are going to make mistakes in that and lose. And so we provide this level of guaranteed supply to Uber that is going to
Hmm.
be super high reliability, high quality. It stabilizes the marketplace. It reduces all those ping ponging events that you talked about.
Yeah.
And when you get in the car, it creates a better experience. And as we grow the fleet from several hundred to several thousand vehicles, the
Yeah.
impact that has on the overall marketplace, and the customer experience scales as well. So that's another huge thing. I mean, think there's also some regulatory hedges. We're helping them scale EVs, which are much
Hmm.
more easy to do for us than individual owners. We can actually, we drive these fleets 70, 80,000 miles a year. And
Yeah.
EVs really, you only get the total cost of ownership, the TCO benefit over a lot of miles. So
Yeah.
for individual drivers that are trying to do that, it's a much less compelling kind of
Yeah. That's a good
capital
point.
trade-off for us. We can make those investments and understand, and underwrite them much more efficiently. And then ultimately, I think it's the underpinnings of what an autonomous future is going to require. Uber and Dara on their earnings call last or at the end of last year, they had this whole supplemental pack on AV, and they're kind of like five puzzle pieces
Yeah.
to get there. And one of the key pieces is on scaled on the ground ops, and that's a big component that what we're creating, these multiple depots with
Yeah.
charging and cleaning and on-site maintenance. We can build that now underwritten by human fleets to be ready, as
Uh,
autonomy scales.
I like that term underwritten by human fleets because I think that's sort of the key, right? The level of investment that is going to be required. And then, of course, if you're waiting for an AV fleet like Waymo to do 100 cars, then, there's a lot more in series as opposed to in parallel, right? Where you can develop a lot of this technology. So I think we'll definitely dig into that to end things. But before we get there, I also want to talk a little bit about your fleet because I mentioned I think you've had Buicks and some Volkswagens in the past. Now I see in LA, I believe they're Alto vehicles, these black Kia EV9s, really good car. I've actually been thinking about one myself now that we have a third baby boy, and I believe it's a 6 or 7 seater. So can you talk a little bit about your fleet in LA and with this Uber partnership? You mentioned EVs and what it looks like these days, a few hundred cars, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're growing the EV fleet dramatically. In fact, every new purchase that we've made since almost a year ago, April, May timeframe
Hmm.
of 2024 has been an EV. And so, as we do that, like and both grow and then do fleet replacement, 70 to 80% of our total fleet is now electrified, and it will continue to
Cool.
grow from there as well. The EV9 we think is an awesome product. It's the right size, the right form factor. I have 4 kids. I have one in my personal fleet
Okay,
with with
nice.
with a lot more car seats than a normal rideshare vehicle. But yeah, it's got space, trunk space, which is really
Hmm.
important.
Is your
Luggage.
entire fleet in LA now EV9s or?
Not entirely. There's still some of the legacy Buicks there
Okay.
as well. But we see again, like as we utilize these fleets, we're now utilizing them much more again, much more
Hmm.
utilization through different days of the week and hours of the day. So they're
Yeah.
getting a lot more miles. That starts to really increase the value of the EVs.
Mm.
The
Are
fuel
you
cost
able
on an
to, sorry to jump in, but I wanted to ask, are you able to like keep these vehicles busy, at like 3, 4 a.m. now? Like, because there's so much demand on Uber. I mean, I guess they're still, doling it out to multiple partners. I just wonder if you've seen like an increase in utilization those like super off-peak times.
There's definitely more hours of the day where it makes sense for us. Historically, in a city like LA, we were operating the fleet kind of on average, call it 9 hours a day, 85 hours a week, something like that.
Mm,
And now in LA, the fleet's operating 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And so, on average, with some of those days, Mondays, Tuesdays being
right.
a little bit less, some of those, weekend days, like starting on Thursday, we
Yeah.
effectively operate, 24/7 through, Sunday evening. So, yeah, it's definitely that demand profile makes the asset efficiency even better.
Hmm.
But it also means that, again, you put more miles on the vehicle and the benefit of electrification becomes true faster because a lot of that is recognized through the fuel cost savings. And
Got it.
so we are looking to, again, I mean, as they reach their end of life, we'll be replacing those Buicks and continuing to grow the EV fleet too.
Okay, cool. I mean, I guess, is there any downside to, kind of this partnership with Uber and kind of being so reliant on them? I mean, you talked about, that now you're at 12 to 14 hours a day. What if they add other fleet partners, or what if they buy their own fleet? Or, I think there's obviously the benefits of scaling, but I'm curious, what are you thinking about, down the road, that first party versus, kind of like partnership option?
Yeah, you nailed the risk on the head there too, Harry. I mean, it is something we think about. Obviously, we need
Mhm.
to be a business that can stand alone and continue to grow. We see Uber as a really really valuable partner, but we still have our own business. That business is profitable and growing in the cities in which it operates, and so it gives us a nice kind of counterbalance. And we think that's also a unique thing about our business. There aren't a lot of other fleets that kind of have built again over a long time kind of their own
Yeah.
first party business. In that way, again, like I wouldn't say we're Google by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not that naive, but I do think like we think about this in a very similar way that Waymo
Yeah.
is, which is that we'd like, to be able to partner, integrate multiple different fleets, have our own platform, operate on Uber's platform, and try to use that to maximize the upside for us. But also, that makes us a better partner for everybody
Yeah.
involved. The bigger we can get, the more scale we can generate, the better insurance costs we can do.
Hmm.
There's a lot of mutual benefits that I think make that a win-win solution for us and our partners.
I think
Investors.
yeah, and I think you kind of answered it well too, in that like if you're really doing something differentiated, right? Like if you're just, one of many fleets out there doing what everyone else is doing, yeah, they may not need you. You're right. But if you have some inherent advantage, right? If you've got better drivers or better data or something that's like actually moving the needle, then that kind of makes you a valuable partner too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And again, like that insurance thing, I think is a great example of something that we've spent a lot of time and a lot
Yeah.
of money developing that. And it's not quite
Well,
IP,
especially
but
because
it's
Uber
close.
really likes to complain about those insurance. I mean, they're literally on the
It's a big
customer's
problem.
receipt. I mean, I think that's kind of insane that like 43, and I bet it's higher by now, probably closer to 50%, because that was December 2024. That's kind of nuts that like they're saying that almost half of their cost of what the passenger pays is going to insurance. I feel like that right there, it should be eye-opening, ton of opportunity there. But we've got a few minutes left. I want to end on diving a little deeper into AVs and Waymo, since we've mentioned them about a dozen times now. First of all, like you've got to be buddies with Waymo. I see a lot of parallels to what they're doing, what you guys are doing. I'm sure you guys are chatting or maybe potential partners, right? Anything you want to announce here on the podcast, let me know.
No announcements to be made. But yeah, look, I mean, I do think what we're doing is really trying to build, again, this kind of operating platform, the
Hmm.
foundation for autonomy. We think Uber brings a ton to the table in terms of the distribution and demand. And we think that, not only Waymo, but a ton of others in the space
Yeah.
from Wave and WeRide and May
Yeah.
Mobility and others that are, announcing or have announced or starting to commercial rollouts. They don't these are technology companies,
Hmm.
and to the extent they operate fleets today, I think it's primarily because they have to kind of also in the same reason that I
Mm.
built my own fleet and built our own technology stack. Like we had to in order to kind of prove the thesis behind the model. They're
Yeah.
having to do that for R&D purposes, but I don't actually think they want to be long-term operators. And so, yeah, we see this as a great opportunity to work with multiple parties to bring different vehicle types. Again, we think that there's going to be a place where you're going to have shared rides, private rides, different vehicle, form factors, and there's going to be different providers that allow for all of that. So the space is super compelling right now. It's maybe more interesting and more exciting than it has been in, I'd say, the last 3 to 5 years for sure. We're at an inflection point. We're really seeing the technology take off. We're close, and so yeah, we're excited to work with all of those players to help make this technology. It's an atoms and bits. We talk about it a
Yeah.
lot in AI. You got to have the bits, but this is a really physical
Yeah.
challenge, and that's what we're focused on winning in.
So I think it's pretty clear Uber, superpower, distribution, demand, reach, Waymo, and others, kind of that AV technology. Like obviously, I'm sure you've ridden in Waymo. I've ridden in a bunch and it's great. It's an amazing product. And there's others that are pretty close behind. Alto, where does Alto fit in? Like how would you describe it in that kind of AV stack?
I look at it like airlines. I mean, you mentioned my history, right? Like
Hmm.
you're going to have the autopilot, is built by a technology company that sells it to
Yeah.
Boeing, who puts it in an airplane, and then you have airlines. and we are the airline interface, right? We have the
Got it.
operating capability, the brand, the product that customers will desire. We think that's really powerful. And then you're going to have the Expedias of the world. That's where Dara came from, and that I think is Uber's superpower. And
Yeah.
so you've got one end, which is, the vehicles themselves, and then how do those vehicles actually turn into
Hmm.
commercial money, and we're going to commercialize them, and then we're going to partner with Uber to get that
Yeah.
product in front of millions and millions of consumers.
So one thing Dara has said about, why Uber is valuable to AV partners is this utilization piece. And you mentioned it a couple times too, utilization and scale. What exactly does that mean though? Like just like is there a concrete example of, I guess especially on the scale piece, right? Because I think about like the downsides of scale. Okay, now you have 10,000 vehicles and you screw one thing up in depreciation and, now you've lost tens of millions or millions of dollars. But I guess like what's a concrete example of how you guys or other operators benefit from, having thousands or tens of thousands of vehicles on the road?
Well, one part of scale is density, and this is what
Hmm.
Uber brings to the table,
Okay.
which is that, trips are really close together, and so you get a high turnover. We call this the P2 to P3 ratio,
Got it.
meaning, the time that you spend in P2 should be,
Hmm.
a lower percentage of your total engaged time. And
Right.
if, your pickups are 10 or 12 minutes apart, then, that's less economical than if your
Right. And
pickups are
just so everybody
5 or 4 minutes.
knows, P1 would be I'm online waiting for a trip. P2 is I get a trip, I'm driving to the customer. And P3 is okay, Will is now in my car, I'm taking them his destination. We always tell drivers, P3, you want a customer not only in the car, but you want them in the car and your wheels moving as fast as possible, right? Because that's really where, drivers kind of, get the highest, make the most money, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And so you want as much P3 time as possible. P2 is
Hmm.
an inevitability.
Yeah.
P1 and P2 are some level of inevitability, but you want to minimize all of that. And so density is a really important way to get
Okay.
there. So that's what Uber brings. Then that'll, scale is I think on our side where, okay, well now, if I have a fleet of 100 or 200 cars, it's probably not enough scale to have my own maintenance shop. I
Mm.
can't keep a technician engaged because I don't have enough work for them to do 20, whatever,
Yep.
40 hours a week on that
Got it.
scale. So I need to outsource that. So then I'm going to pay someone else a margin to have that maintenance done on my car. And if you're a consumer or an
Mm.
individual, you're going to be paying a really high margin. I might be able to like work that down at scale, to get some like discounts for the amount of work that I have done. But
Hmm.
the best way to do it is for me to own it and bring it into my own garage where I don't even have to take the car somewhere else. I employ the person that does all that maintenance, and then I get the absolute lowest cost of maintaining that vehicle. That requires a fleet of several hundred, maybe even 1,000 vehicles in order
Mm.
to really make that work to kind of have your own body shop, let's say. And so, but that's meaningful. Maintenance is, I don't know, 15% of my COGS.
Mm.
So if I can save, a couple percentage points on 15%, like in a business that's highly competitive
Yeah.
and a tough low margin business, like those things really, really start to matter.
What are some of the downsides of scale?
Well, you mentioned it, right? Risk.
Hmm.
Obviously, as
Got
you
it.
get bigger, like the numbers are bigger. And so, if you make a mistake, the impact of the mistake is no questionably larger. And so it really becomes important to have the kind of experience that we do
Yeah.
to be able to inform that decision making so that you're not scaling from a base, of nothing, because I think you
Hmm.
could make some really bad assumptions. But we are scaling quickly, but we also had a set 600 vehicle fleet before we even started this
Right.
business. And we've done that in a lot of cities for a
Yeah.
long time. And so we have a lot of information to inform the decisions about what scale will do. And we think that that's also a big differentiator.
Got it. So I think Waymo has been a big inflection point for me personally. When they're launched in LA and sort of you can actually take rides, they raised $5 billion. That didn't hurt either. I started my new newsletter, the Driverless Digest, and covering AVs and the intersection with rideshare. Was that a big inflection point for you also? Were you guys already partnered with Uber or thinking about it? Or it's like, wow, now is a great time. Like, how did that Waymo AV piece like fit into how you're thinking about your business?
Again, I think it's really critical because I think that they are starting to really prove to the market that this is close,
Yeah.
and again, like how close are we, to get to real scale in multiple cities and the kind of sizes of fleets that are necessary. I think it's still, 3, 5, 7 years away,
Yeah.
but
Well,
it's
it's
close
funny
enough
because
and real enough.
Waymo is big and it isn't, like, wow,
Right.
they're like if you're
Exactly.
in LA or San Francisco, they're everywhere. But if you compare them to Uber's global, or even US footprint per day, it's like, wow, they're tiny. So it's funny. It's this weird, we just
But
featured,
it's
oh,
put it in
Waymo's,
people's minds. It's
yeah.
reintroduced. I think we were in this kind of trough of disillusionment for a
Hmm.
while, right? Coming out of COVID and like ATG went to Aurora, all this stuff happened. It was kind of in a
Yeah.
vacuum. The development was still happening, but it wasn't public and out there on the
Hmm.
roads. And now we're there. Investors can experience it. The public can experience it. People can understand. That just creates a level of understanding
Yeah.
that I think is really critical. And so it doesn't have to be huge, but it is. It's big enough now that I think the future is, people's vision of the
Yeah.
future is becoming more clear. And that's really helping kind of catalyze businesses like ours that have always been saying, we're building for this future. We're
Yeah.
underwriting it. Again, you mentioned that term underwrite. I use that all the time. Look, we're
Hmm.
taking out some of that time. There is time-based risk in this. Is
Yeah.
it 2 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 20 years? We don't really know. But if we can go build this infrastructure, the charging, the depots, all that sort of stuff, and it makes economic sense now, we
Yeah.
can take out that timing risk, which is really a unique factor that helps us, again, get ahead. It is a long, capitally intense road. And so if we can start now and underwrite it now, we think that that's going to be really valuable long term, whether it's, just a couple of years or maybe longer.
Yeah. Cool. Love it. Well said. So, final question, Will. What is next for Alto? Where will you launch next? And what are you focused on going forward?
I think the confidentiality policies in my agreement with Uber probably do not
Man,
allow
I'm a
me to
little
publicly
rusty on
disclose
my
that.
interview skills. I took a little break for paternity leave. I always try to sneak these questions in, and you're like a seasoned veteran, so you just shut
But
me
but
down.
yeah, look for us in more cities, in California and really across the country very soon.
Nice. All right, and kind of continuing with this Uber fleet partner model, or a little bit of both.
We're really excited about the partnership, and we think that it's a huge growth factor for the company. So, yeah, I think we'll have some exciting announcements from, city growth. Hopefully, some
Cool.
some some cool fleet partnerships, including AVs to come later this year and into 2026 for sure.
Nice, right on. Well, I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast for a fourth time. You're now in the lead and one of my favorite guests. So I always appreciate you coming on and appreciate all of your insight and advice. I think is a really cool time for the industry, underwriting the future of autonomy. So appreciate if folks want to connect with you, we can leave a link to your LinkedIn. Alto, what's the best place to find you, get a hold of you?
I'm most on X, so find me there, and I check my LinkedIn about once a month. So you can go there, but my response will be slow.
All right. Or I'm sure people can try to guess your email. So appreciate you coming on, Will. Take care.
Yeah, good to see you, Harry.